The blistering sun sank low on the horizon as Hank Jacobs rode toward his lonely ranch house, his infant daughter wailing against his chest and tears streaming unchecked down his dust-coated face. 3 weeks since Elizabeth had passed during childbirth, and every sunset brought fresh grief washing over him like the relentless tides of an ocean he'd never seen, but had heard tell of from travelers passing through Willow Creek. The year was 1871, and the Dakota Territory offered little mercy to a man alone with a newborn. Hank's weathered hands, calloused from years of ranch work, felt clumsy and inadequate as he tried to soothe little Abigail's cries. His horse, Thunder, plodded steadily homeward, the animal seeming to understand the need for a gentle pace despite the gathering darkness. "Hush now, little one," Hank whispered, his voice breaking. "Pa's got you." But his words only seemed to fuel her distress. Her tiny face scrunched and reddened as her cries echoed across the empty plains. The weight of his helplessness crushed down on Hank's chest harder than any stampede ever could. As the silhouette of his modest ranch house appeared against the purple sky, Hank noticed something unusual. Lamplight glowed in the windows. His body tensed immediately, his free hand moving to the pistol at his hip. Raiders weren't uncommon in these parts, and an unprotected homestead made for easy pickings. He dismounted carefully, cradling Abigail against him, and approached with caution. The door to his home opened before he reached it, spilling golden light onto the packed dirt of his yard. A woman stood framed in the doorway, her slender figure casting a long shadow. "Mr. Jacobs." Her voice carried clearly through the evening air. "I heard you coming. I'm Jessie O'Malley. Your neighbor, Mr. Peterson, sent me, said you might need some help." Hank stood frozen, uncertain whether to advance or retreat. Abigail's cries intensified, and the woman Jessie stepped forward without hesitation. "That little one sounds hungry," she said, moving closer. "May I?" Before Hank could respond, she was beside him, her hands gentle but firm as she took the squalling infant from his arms. To his astonishment, Abigail's cries immediately began to soften as Jessie rocked her with practiced ease. "I've prepared some goat's milk," Jessie said, nodding toward the house. "It's warming by the fire. I took the liberty of tidying up a bit inside. Hope you don't mind, Mr. Jacobs." Hank found his voice at last. "Aye, thank you, madam, and it's just Hank." He followed her into his own home, watching in disbelief as she navigated his kitchen as if she'd lived there for years, all while cradling his daughter with one arm. "Mr. Peterson mentioned your situation," she said, her tone matter-of-fact yet somehow gentle. "I've been helping families around these parts for a spell, midwifing, nursing, looking after little ones when needed." Hank removed his hat, suddenly conscious of his disheveled appearance. "I'm obliged to you, Miss O'Malley, but I can't afford to, Jessie," she corrected him. "And let's not talk payment tonight. This little angel needs feeding, and you look like you haven't slept in days." Her blue eyes assessed him frankly. "When did you last eat a proper meal, Hank Jacobs?" The truth was, he couldn't remember. The days had blurred together since Elizabeth's passing, each one a fog of grief punctuated by Abigail's cries and his own inadequacy in soothing her. Jessie nodded as if his silence was answer enough. "Sit," she commanded, gesturing to his own kitchen table. To his surprise, he obeyed without question. Hank watched as she tested the warmed milk on her wrist before feeding his daughter with a cloth-wrapped finger, letting the baby suckle the milk slowly. Abigail took to it hungrily, her tiny hands curling against the fabric of Jessie's simple blue dress. "Where did you learn to do that?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. 7 younger siblings, Jessie replied with a small smile, "and too many babies born in this territory to count. You pick things up quick when there's need." As Abigail fed, Jessie somehow managed to serve Hank a bowl of stew that smelled better than anything that had come from his kitchen in years. His stomach growled loudly, prompting a soft laugh from Jessie. "Eat," she said. "I'll look after her." Hank ate mechanically at first, then with increasing hunger as the rich flavors awakened something in him that had been dormant for weeks. When he finished, he looked up to find Jessie swaying gently, humming a soft lullaby to his now sleeping daughter. She's been fighting sleep, Hank said quietly, amazed. Cries through the night most times, Jessie nodded. Babies sense our feelings, your grief, your fear, she feels it all. Her eyes met his across the room. Tonight, you need sleep as much as she does. Go on now, I'll keep watch over her. I can't ask you to, you didn't ask, I'm offering. Her tone brooked no argument. There's a rocking chair in the corner, we'll be fine. Too exhausted to protest further, Hank retreated to his bedroom. He intended only to rest for a moment, but the moment his head touched the pillow, exhaustion claimed him entirely. He woke with a start hours later, panicked at the silence. No baby crying. He rushed from the bedroom to find Jessie still in the rocking chair, Abigail sleeping peacefully against her chest. Jessie's eyes were closed, her breathing deep and even. The sight struck him with such force that he had to steady himself against the doorframe. In the pale light of dawn filtering through the curtains, he saw not just a woman who had helped a stranger, but something he'd thought lost forever hope. As if sensing his presence, Jessie's eyes fluttered open, meeting his gaze directly. Morning, she whispered. She's been an angel most of the night. Miss O'Malley, Jessie, I don't know how to thank you, she smiled, and something in Hank's chest tightened unexpectedly. Well, Mr. Jacobs, I reckon a cup of coffee would be a fine start. Coffee, he repeated, almost dazed. Yes, I can manage that. As he moved to the stove, Hank realized it was the first morning since Elizabeth's death that he hadn't woken to tears his own or Abigail's. He glanced back at Jessie, rocking his daughter with such natural ease, and wondered if perhaps God hadn't abandoned him completely after all. Jessie stayed through breakfast, showing Hank how to properly prepare the goat's milk and how to hold Abigail while feeding her. Her hands guided his with gentle confidence, and each successful moment with his daughter felt like a small victory. I should be getting back, Jessie said finally, gathering her shawl. My cottage is about 3 miles east, just past Peterson's place. Hank felt panic rising. When will you return? The question came out more desperate than he'd intended. Jessie regarded him thoughtfully. I can come by tomorrow if you'd like. Show you a few more things to help with the little one. I would appreciate that very much, Hank said, trying to maintain some dignity despite the relief flooding through him. Jessie nodded, touching Abigail's cheek gently before turning to leave. At the door, she paused. Mr. Jacobs, Hank, it gets easier, not right away and not all at once, but it does. After she left, Hank stood in his doorway watching her figure grow smaller as she walked the path toward Peterson's ranch. Abigail stirred against his chest, but instead of the usual dread, he felt a strange new confidence. They would make it through this day, and tomorrow Jessie would return. True to her word, Jessie appeared the next afternoon, a basket over her arm filled with supplies for Abigail and fresh bread that filled the house with a mouth-watering aroma as she warmed it. She showed Hank how to bathe the baby, how to check for rashes, how to swaddle her properly for sleep. You're a natural, she told him as he successfully wrapped Abigail in a small blanket, the baby's eyes already drooping. You just needed a little guidance. Had plenty of experience with calves and foals, Hank said with a small smile. Babies are a sight more complicated. Not so different, really, Jessie replied, her eyes twinkling. Both need food, warmth, and love. The rest works itself out. That evening, as they sat on his porch watching the sunset, Abigail sleeping contentedly in a makeshift cradle nearby, Hank found himself telling Jessie about Elizabeth. About their courtship, their dreams for the ranch, the joy they'd felt when they learned about the baby. The words spilled out of him like water from a broken dam, and Jessie listened without interruption, her eyes sometimes glistening with tears but never looking away. She would have been a wonderful mother, he concluded, his voice rough with emotion. She chose a good father for her child, Jessie said quietly. That counts for a great deal. Days turned into weeks, and Jessie became a fixture at the Jacobs ranch. She arrived each morning and left each evening, though Hank increasingly found himself inventing reasons for her to stay later, a fence that needed mending where he could use an extra hand. A new recipe he thought she might enjoy trying with the vegetables from his small garden. The first time Abigail smiled, really smiled, not just a reflex, both Hank and Jessie were leaning over her. The baby's face lit up, her eyes crinkling, and a distinct gummy smile spread across her tiny features. Jessie gasped in delight, and when Hank looked up, their faces were inches apart, both wearing matching expressions of wonder. "Did you see that?" Jessie whispered. "I did," Hank replied, suddenly acutely aware of how close they were, of the scent of lavender that always seemed to surround Jessie, of the flecks of gold in her green eyes that he'd never noticed before. The moment stretched between them, heavy with possibility, until Abigail gurgled and broke the spell. Jessie straightened quickly, a flush spreading across her cheeks. "She's growing so fast," she said, her voice slightly higher than normal. "Soon she'll be crawling, and then you'll really have your hands full." That night, after Jessie had gone home, Hank sat on his porch long after dark, staring at the stars and confronting the truth he'd been avoiding for weeks. He was falling for Jessie O'Malley. The realization brought both exhilaration and crushing guilt. Elizabeth had been gone just over 2 months. Was it a betrayal to feel this way so soon? As if in answer, a cool breeze swept across the porch, rustling the wind chimes Elizabeth had hung when they first built the house. The gentle tinkling sound had always been her favorite. Tonight, instead of bringing pain, the familiar melody soothed him somehow. The next day, Jessie arrived later than usual, looking troubled. She went through her usual routine with Abigail, but her smile seemed forced, her conversation stilted. "Is everything all right?" Hank finally asked as they sat down to the midday meal. Jessie hesitated, pushing food around her plate. "I've had a letter," she said finally, "from my sister in Bismarck. She's expecting her first child and has asked me to come help her through the confinement." Hank felt as though the floor had dropped away beneath him. "I see," he managed. "When would you be leaving?" "The stage runs in 3 days." Jessie met his eyes briefly before looking away. "I'd be gone at least through the winter, months without seeing her." The thought made his chest ache in a way that surprised him with its intensity. "Abigail will miss you," he said, the words inadequate but all he could manage. "And I'll miss her," Jessie replied softly. "Very much." That evening, as Jessie prepared to leave, a sudden thunderstorm broke overhead. Rain pounded down with such ferocity that visibility disappeared beyond the porch. "You can't travel in this," Hank said, taking her shawl before she could wrap it around herself. "You'll have to stay until it passes." Jessie looked uncertain. "I don't want to impose. It's not an imposition," Hank insisted. "It would be irresponsible of me to let you go out in this weather." The storm showed no signs of abating as darkness fell. Hank prepared the small guest room that had rarely been used, finding clean linens and making up the bed while Jessie rocked Abigail to sleep. "Thank you," Jessie said when he showed her the room. "This is very kind." "Least I could do," Hank replied awkwardly, "after everything you've done for us." They stood in uncomfortable silence for a moment before Hank cleared his throat. "Well, good night then." "Good night, Hank." He retreated to his own room, listening to the rain hammering on the roof and the occasional rumble of thunder. Sleep eluded him completely. All he could think about was Jessie leaving, taking her warmth and light with her, leaving him and Abigail alone again. Around midnight, Abigail's cries pierced the darkness. Hank was on his feet instantly, but as he entered the main room, he found Jessie already there, lifting the baby from her cradle. "I heard her first," Jessie explained, cradling Abigail against her shoulder. "Thought you might need your rest." "You're the guest," Hank said. "You shouldn't have to. I don't mind," Jessie interrupted, swaying gently as Abigail's cries began to subside. "I've grown rather attached to this little one." In the dim light of the single lantern Jessie had lit, Hank watched as she rocked his daughter, humming softly. The tenderness in her expression made his heart constrict. "Jessie," he said, his voice barely audible above the rain, "don't go to Bismarck." She looked up, her expression unreadable in the shadowy light. "What? Don't go," he repeated, stepping closer. "Stay here with us, Hank." Her voice held a warning. "I know it hasn't been long since Elizabeth," he continued, the words tumbling out now. "And maybe this is too soon, maybe I'm out of line, but I can't let you leave without telling you what you've come to mean to me." Jessie's eyes glistened in the lamplight. "You're grieving. You're grateful for the help with Abigail, that's all this is. No, Hank said firmly. It's more than gratitude. When you're here, the house feels like a home again. When you smile, I remember what happiness feels like. I know the timing is all wrong, but my feelings for you are real, Jessie. A tear slipped down her cheek. I can't be Elizabeth's replacement. I'm not asking you to be, Hank said gently. Elizabeth will always be Abigail's mother, and a part of my heart will always belong to her. But my heart is big enough for new love too. I think she would want that for me, for Abigail. Jessie looked down at the baby, now sleeping peacefully against her chest. I've tried so hard not to let myself feel this way, she whispered. It seemed wrong somehow. Hope surged through Hank. Then you do feel something? Of course I do, Jessie admitted, meeting his gaze at last. How could I not? You're a good man, Hank Jacobs, kind and strong and devoted to your daughter, but I'm afraid. Of what? Of building my life around someone again, only to lose them. Her voice caught. My husband died at Antietam. I was 19 years old and suddenly a widow. That's why I understand your grief so well. Hank felt as though he'd been struck. In all their conversations, Jessie had never mentioned a husband. I didn't know, he said softly. It was 8 years ago now, Jessie said. I don't speak of Henry often. It still hurts, but differently now, a dull ache rather than a sharp pain. After he died, I promised myself I'd never risk my heart that way again. And yet here you are, preparing to leave because your feelings scare you, Hank said gently. Jessie's eyes widened slightly. Is that what you think, that I'm running away, aren't you? Hank stepped closer, close enough now that he could have touched her if he dared. Your sister is with child, yes, but there must be others who could help her. You're choosing to go now because what's happening between us frightens you. For a moment, Jessie looked as if she might deny it, but then her shoulders sagged slightly. Perhaps you're right, she admitted. It would be easier to leave than to stay and risk my heart again. Easier, yes, Hank agreed, but is it what you truly want? The silence stretched between them, broken only by the steady drumming of rain on the roof and Abigail's soft breathing. Finally, Jessie spoke. What I want, she said slowly, is to stop being afraid of loving again. What I want is to wake up each morning to Abigail's smiles and your eyes looking at me the way they're looking at me right now. What I want is to stay. Joy surged through Hank like a physical force. Then stay, he said simply. Stay and we'll face whatever comes together. Jessie's smile was tremulous but real. I'll still need to visit my sister. She is truly expecting her first child. Of course, Hank said quickly. We could all go, make it a family journey. Family, Jessie repeated, testing the word. Is that what we are becoming? I hope so, Hank replied honestly, if you'll give us the chance. Jessie looked down at Abigail, then back at Hank. I think I'd like that very much. Without conscious thought, Hank closed the distance between them, careful not to disturb the sleeping baby. His hand came up to cup Jessie's cheek, and when she didn't pull away, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers in a gentle, questioning kiss. Jessie responded with a soft sigh, leaning into him slightly. The kiss was brief, but held the promise of more to come. When they separated, both were smiling. I should put her back in her cradle, Jessie whispered. Let me, Hank said, carefully taking his daughter. As he laid Abigail down, he was struck by how different things were from just 2 months ago when he'd been drowning in grief and helplessness. Now, with Jessie by his side, the future seemed bright with possibility. The next morning, they rode together to Jessie's small cottage to collect her things. The storm had passed, leaving behind a freshly washed world sparkling in the sunlight. Jessie's home was modest but charming, with a small garden out front and cheerful curtains in the windows. It's not much, she said as she unlocked the door, but it's been a good home to me these past few years. It's lovely, Hank said sincerely, like the woman who lives here. Jessie blushed at the compliment. Smooth talker, she teased, but her pleased smile belied her words. As she gathered her belongings, Hank explored the cottage, noting the small touches that made it uniquely Jessie's dried herbs hanging from the rafters, books stacked by a comfortable chair, a quilt in vibrant colors draped over the bed. On a small table by the window, he noticed a daguerreotype in a simple wooden frame. A young man in a Union Army uniform stood proudly, his expression serious but with a hint of a smile in his eyes. "Henry," Jessie said quietly from behind him, "taken just before he left for the war." Hank turned to her. He had kind eyes. "He did," Jessie agreed, taking the frame and looking at it thoughtfully. "You would have liked him, I think, and he would have approved of you." She carefully wrapped the frame in a soft cloth and placed it in her bag. "I'll always keep this," she said. "Just as you'll always keep your memories of Elizabeth, but I've learned that honoring their memory doesn't mean we can't create new happiness." Hank took her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "You're a wise woman, Jessie O'Malley." "Not wise," she said with a small smile. "Just learning as I go, same as you." They returned to Hank's ranch, their ranch now, in a way by midday. Abigail, who had been cared for by Mrs. Peterson during their brief absence, greeted them with happy gurgles, reaching for Jessie the moment she saw her. "See that," Hank said proudly. "She knows who her people are." Jessie cradled Abigail close, inhaling the sweet baby scent of her. "Her people," she repeated softly. "I like the sound of that." The days that followed took on a new rhythm. Jessie wrote to her sister, explaining that she would come for a visit rather than an extended stay, and would be bringing Hank and Abigail with her. They planned to make the journey in late September, when the weather would still be favorable for travel. In the meantime, they settled into a comfortable routine. Hank worked the ranch with renewed vigor, while Jessie tended to Abigail and established a garden behind the house that promised to yield vegetables well into the fall. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch, watching the sunset and talking about everything and nothing. Their courtship progressed slowly, respectfully, both mindful of the losses they had endured and the second chance they had been given. Hank found himself falling more deeply in love with Jessie each day, with her strength, her kindness, the way she sang to Abigail, the determination with which she tackled every task. One evening in late August, as they sat watching fireflies dance in the gathering darkness, Hank reached for Jessie's hand. "I've been thinking," he began. "A dangerous pastime," Jessie teased, squeezing his fingers. "Perhaps," he acknowledged with a smile, "but necessary in this case. I've been thinking about our trip to Bismarck." "What about it? Having second thoughts?" "Not at all," Hank assured her, "but I was wondering if you might consider making another stop while we're traveling." Jessie looked at him curiously. "Where did you have in mind?" "Sioux Falls," Hank said, his heart beginning to race. "There's a fine church there, I'm told, and a judge who could marry us if you were amenable." Jessie's eyes widened. "Hank Jacobs, is this a proposal?" "Not a very good one, apparently," Hank said with a nervous laugh. He slid from the porch swing to one knee before her, still holding her hand. "Jessie O'Malley, these past months have shown me that life can bring joy even after the deepest sorrow. You've healed not just Abigail with your care, but me as well. I love you and I want to build a life with you if you'll have me. Will you marry me?" Tears spilled down Jessie's cheeks, but her smile was radiant. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will marry you, Hank Jacobs." He rose to kiss her, a kiss full of promise and hope for their future together. When they separated, both breathless, Jessie laughed softly. "What is it?" Hank asked. "I was just thinking that when I came here that first night, I never imagined this outcome," she said. "I only wanted to help a grieving man and his motherless child." "And you did," Hank said seriously. "You helped us more than you know. You still do every day." Inside the house, Abigail began to cry. Jessie stood, tugging Hank to his feet as well. "Duty calls, future husband," she said with a smile. "Future wife," he replied, savoring the words. Together they went to tend to their daughter. The journey to Bismarck via Sioux Falls was planned for the third week of September. As the date approached, excitement and nervousness filled the Jacobs household in equal measure. Jessie sewed a simple but elegant dress of pale blue, while Hank polished his best boots and had the local barber trim his beard to a respectable length. 3 days before their planned departure, disaster struck. A sudden autumn storm swept through the region, bringing hail that damaged crops and roofs throughout the county. The Jacobs Ranch was hit hard. Part of the barn roof collapsed, and several fence sections were destroyed, allowing a dozen cattle to escape. "We'll have to postpone the trip," Hank said grimly as he surveyed the damage the morning after the storm. I can't leave the ranch like this. Jessie nodded, disappointed but practical. Of course, the repairs can't wait. She bounced Abigail on her hip, the baby now nearly 5 months old and increasingly alert to the world around her. We'll reschedule for spring, perhaps, but as they began the repairs, help arrived unexpectedly. First came the Petersons, then the Millers from the next property over, and by midday, nearly every neighbor within a 10-mile radius had shown up with tools and supplies. Heard you two were headed off to get hitched, old Mr. Peterson said with a wink as he hammered a fence post into place. Can't have a little weather delay spoiling that now, can we? We're neighbors, Mrs. Miller added, handing out cups of cold lemonade to the workers. This is what we do. By sunset, the barn roof was patched, the fences repaired, and all but 2 of the missing cattle recovered. The community gathered in the Jacobs' yard for an impromptu celebration, with food contributed by each family and music provided by young Tom Miller's fiddle. As Hank looked around at the gathering at these people who had come together to ensure his and Jessie's happiness, he felt a profound sense of belonging. This was what community meant in the harsh reality of frontier life. This was why people survived out here against all odds. Looks like we'll be making that trip after all, he said to Jessie as they watched Abigail being cooed over by a circle of admiring neighbors. Thanks to good friends, Jessie agreed, leaning against his shoulder. The morning of their departure dawned clear and mild. Mrs. Peterson had volunteered to look after the ranch during their absence, her husband and sons promising to check in regularly and handle any problems that might arise. They took the stage first to Sioux Falls, a 2-day journey with Abigail proving to be a surprisingly good traveler, charming their fellow passengers with her bright eyes and ready smile. In Sioux Falls, they found lodging at a respectable hotel and made arrangements with the local minister for a simple ceremony the following day. That evening, as Abigail slept peacefully in a cradle provided by the hotel, Hank and Jessie sat by the window of their room looking out at the bustling town below. Nervous? Hank asked, noticing Jessie's fingers twisting in her lap. A little, she admitted. Are you? No, Hank said honestly. This feels right, Jessie, like it was meant to be, she smiled, relaxing slightly. It does, doesn't it? Still, I can't help thinking of them, of Elizabeth and Henry, wondering if they would truly understand. Hank took her hands in his. I believe they would. They loved us and they would want us to be happy. You're right, Jessie said, squeezing his fingers. And tomorrow we begin our new life together, the 3 of us. The first day of many, Hank promised. They were married the next morning in a simple ceremony with Abigail in Jessie's arms throughout. The minister's wife and the hotel proprietor served as witnesses, and though the occasion lacked the trappings of a grand wedding, neither Hank nor Jessie could imagine a more perfect day. I now pronounce you husband and wife, the minister declared. You may kiss your bride, Mr. Jacobs. Hank leaned in, kissing Jessie tenderly while being careful not to squish Abigail between them. The baby reached up, patting both their cheeks as if giving her approval, which made everyone laugh. Mrs. Jacobs, Hank said when they separated, testing the sound of it. Mrs. Jacobs, Jessie repeated, her eyes shining. I rather like it. They continued on to Bismarck the following day, arriving at Jessie's sister Catherine's home to a warm welcome. Catherine, round with child and glowing with health, embraced Jessie tightly before turning to meet her new brother-in-law and niece. So this is the man who stole my sister's heart, she said, studying Hank with frank curiosity. I see the appeal, she added with a wink that made Hank blush. Catherine, Jessie scolded, but she was laughing. And this beautiful creature must be Abigail, Catherine continued, tickling the baby under her chin. Oh, she's precious, Jessie. You're a lucky woman. I know, Jessie said softly, looking at Hank with such love that his chest tightened with emotion. They stayed in Bismarck for 2 weeks, during which time Jessie helped prepare Catherine for the arrival of her baby. Hank enjoyed getting to know Jessie's family, not just Catherine and her husband James, but also 2 of Jessie's brothers who lived nearby with their families. You've chosen well, sister, Jessie's older brother William told her one evening as they all sat around Catherine's dining table. "He looks at you like you hung the moon and stars." "Because she did," Hank said simply, taking Jessie's hand, "at least in my sky." Their return journey to Dakota Territory was slower than their outbound trip, as early October brought cooler weather and occasional rain. They took their time, stopping in small towns along the way, enjoying their first adventure as a family. In one such town, while waiting for a stage connection, they wandered into a small general store. Jessie was immediately drawn to a beautiful rocking chair near the window, its wood polished to a high shine and its seat cushioned with soft leather. "It's lovely, isn't it?" she said, running her hand along the curved arm. "It is," Hank agreed, watching her face. "Would you like it for the house?" Jessie looked up in surprise. "It's too extravagant, Hank. I know we don't need it," Hank interrupted gently, "but I'd like you to have it. Something beautiful for our home, to mark our new beginning." After a moment's hesitation, Jessie nodded. It would be perfect for nursing Abigail and eventually for reading stories to her. The storekeeper arranged to have the rocking chair shipped to their ranch, assuring them it would arrive within a month. It was an extravagance, yes, but one that Hank didn't regret for a moment. Jessie deserved beautiful things, and he intended to provide them whenever he could. They arrived home on a crisp autumn afternoon to find the ranch in perfect order, thanks to the Petersons' diligent care. Mrs. Peterson had even prepared a welcoming meal that waited for them in the oven, filling the house with delicious aromas. "Home," Jessie sighed as she carried a sleepy Abigail into the house. "Our home." "Welcome home, Mrs. Jacobs," Hank said, kissing her cheek before going to bring in their luggage. That night, after Abigail was settled in her cradle, Hank and Jessie sat on the porch despite the chill in the air, wrapped in a quilt in each other's arms. "Happy?" Hank asked, pressing a kiss to Jessie's temple. "Completely," she replied, snuggling closer to his warmth. "Are you?" "More than I ever thought possible again," Hank admitted. "You've given me back my life, Jessie. You and Abigail, we've given each other life," Jessie corrected gently. "That's what love does. It restores us, heals us, makes us whole again." As if to emphasize her point, a shooting star streaked across the darkening sky, leaving a trail of light in its wake. "Make a wish," Jessie whispered, pointing. Hank smiled, tightening his arms around his wife. "I already have everything I could wish for," he said. "Right here." The promised rocking chair arrived 3 weeks later, delivered by the stage company to the ranch. Hank set it up in the corner of the main room near the fireplace, where the light was best for reading and sewing. Jessie immediately claimed it as her favorite spot, often sitting there with Abigail in the evenings, while Hank played the harmonica he'd learned to use during his cattle driving days. Winter settled over Dakota Territory with its usual ferocity, but the Jacobs household remained warm and bright against the howling winds and drifting snow. The three of them established routines and traditions, building their family bond stronger with each passing day. Christmas brought a special joy as they celebrated Abigail's first holiday. Hank cut a small pine tree from their land and set it up in the house, decorating it with strings of dried berries and small wooden ornaments he'd carved in the evenings. Jessie baked gingerbread and sewed a tiny stocking for Abigail to hang by the fireplace. "She's too young to remember any of this," Hank observed as they sat by the fire on Christmas Eve, Abigail already asleep in her cradle. "But we'll remember," Jessie said. "And we'll tell her about it when she's older, how we celebrated our first Christmas as a family." "The first of many," Hank promised, kissing her softly. Jessie's hand came to rest on her stomach, a gentle, protective gesture. "Yes," she agreed with a secretive smile. "The first of many, with our family growing each year." Hank's eyes widened as her meaning registered. "Jessie, are you?" She nodded, her eyes shining in the firelight. "I suspected for a few weeks now, but I wanted to be sure before I told you, Doctor. Bailey confirmed it yesterday when I went into town. We'll have a new addition come summer." Joy surged through Hank, so powerful it nearly took his breath away. He gathered Jessie into his arms, lifting her from her chair and spinning her in a circle until she laughed and begged him to stop. Careful, she admonished, though her eyes danced with happiness. We don't want to wake Abigail, a baby, Hank whispered, setting her gently back on her feet but keeping his arms around her. Our baby, Jessie confirmed, leaning her forehead against his. A little brother or sister for Abigail. That night, as snow fell softly outside their window, Hank lay awake long after Jessie had fallen asleep beside him. His mind was filled not with the grief that had once consumed him, but with gratitude for the unexpected blessings life had brought him. He thought of that desperate day nearly a year ago when he'd ridden home with Abigail crying against his chest, his heart broken and his future bleak. How could he have known then that salvation would come in the form of a determined woman with healing hands and a heart big enough to love both him and his daughter? Jessie stirred beside him, mumbling something in her sleep before settling again. Hank smiled in the darkness, placing a protective hand over hers where it rested on her still flat stomach. Their child grew there, a new life born of the love they had found together. The winter months passed in a blur of domestic contentment. Jessie's pregnancy progressed smoothly, her body changing gradually as their child grew within her. Hank found himself watching her with a mixture of awe and protectiveness, remembering all too well the dangers of childbirth that had taken Elizabeth. You're hovering again, Jessie told him one day in early April as she hung laundry on the line while he watched nervously from nearby. I'm pregnant, not made of glass. I know, Hank said, having the grace to look sheepish. I just worry. Jessie's expression softened. She set down her basket and came to him, taking his hands in hers. I understand why you worry, she said gently. But this is different, Hank. I'm healthy, the baby is healthy, and Dr. Bailey says everything is progressing perfectly. Elizabeth was healthy too, Hank couldn't help saying, the fear that lurked at the edges of his mind finally given voice. I know, Jessie acknowledged, and there are never guarantees in this life, but living in fear of what might happen robs us of the joy of what is happening. She placed his hand on her rounded belly. Feel that, that's our child, strong and vigorous. Focus on that miracle, not on fears of what could go wrong. As if to emphasize her point, a distinct movement rippled under his palm, the baby kicking firmly against his hand. Hank's breath caught and a smile spread across his face despite his concerns. That's quite a kick, he said with wonder. Takes after his mama, I reckon, or her papa, Jessie countered with a grin. Either way, this little one is strong and determined to make an entrance into the world. And I intend to be here to welcome him or her, Hank Jacobs. I have no plans to leave you or our children. Her confidence was contagious, and Hank found his fears, while not vanishing completely, receding to a manageable level. He chose to focus instead on preparing for their new arrival, building a larger cradle, setting aside money for additional supplies, making plans to expand the house with another bedroom come fall. Abigail, now crawling and beginning to pull herself up on furniture, seemed to sense the coming change. She became increasingly interested in Jessie's growing belly, patting it gently and babbling to the baby inside. Her first recognizable word besides mama and papa was what sounded very much like baby, which delighted both her parents. She's going to be a wonderful big sister, Jessie predicted as they watched Abigail carefully sharing her wooden blocks with Jessie's stomach one evening. She has a wonderful mother to learn from, Hank replied, his heart full as he observed his family. June brought scorching heat to the plains, and with it, increasing discomfort for Jessie as she entered her final month of pregnancy. She continued to manage the household and care for Abigail, though she tired more easily and often had to rest in the afternoon. Maybe we should ask Mrs. Peterson to come help for a few weeks, Hank suggested one evening as he massaged Jessie's swollen ankles. Not yet, Jessie said, though her grateful sigh as his fingers worked out the tension in her feet suggested she was closer to accepting help than she had been previously. But perhaps after the baby comes, it might be good to have an extra pair of hands then. The baby, however, had other plans. 2 weeks before the expected arrival, Jessie woke in the middle of the night with a gasp. Hank, she said, shaking his shoulder. Hank, wake up, it's time. Hank was instantly alert, years of responding to nighttime emergencies on the ranch serving him well. "Are you sure it's early?" "Very sure," Jessie confirmed, grimacing as another contraction gripped her. "This little one is eager to join us." Hank sprang into action, saddling his fastest horse and riding to fetch Dr. Bailey while a neighbor's wife came to stay with Jessie and Abigail. By the time he returned with the doctor, Jessie's labor was well established, her contractions coming regularly and with increasing intensity. "Everything looks good," Dr. Bailey assured them after examining Jessie. "Baby's in the perfect position and you're progressing well, Mrs. Jacobs." Despite these reassurances, fear gnawed at Hank as the hours passed. He stayed by Jessie's side, wiping her brow, holding her hand through contractions, whispering encouragement when pain made her falter. "You're the strongest person I know," he told her as dawn broke and the labor intensified. "You can do this, Jessie. We're almost there." Jessie, exhausted but determined, nodded and gripped his hand tighter as another contraction built. "Together," she managed to say. "We do this together." Just as the sun fully cleared the horizon, flooding the bedroom with golden light, their child entered the world with a lusty cry that seemed to fill the entire house. "A boy," Dr. Bailey announced, lifting the red-faced, squalling infant for them to see. "A fine, healthy boy." Relief and joy surged through Hank in equal measure as the doctor placed the baby on Jessie's chest. She was pale and exhausted, but her eyes shone with triumph and love as she cradled their son. "Hello, little one," she whispered, touching his tiny cheek with a gentle finger. "We've been waiting for you." Hank leaned in, overwhelmed by the sight of his wife and newborn son. "He's perfect," he managed to say, his voice thick with emotion. "And so are you." Jessie looked up at him, her smile radiant despite her exhaustion. "We did it," she said simply. "You did it," Hank corrected, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "I just stood by and worried." "Your worrying was very helpful," Jessie teased weakly. "What shall we name him?" They had discussed names but hadn't settled on final choices, wanting to meet their child first. Looking at his son's red hair already visible in the damp curls on his head and strong features, Hank knew instantly. "Samuel," he said, "after your father, if that's all right with you." Tears filled Jessie's eyes. "Samuel Henry Jacobs," she suggested, "to honor both our fathers." Hank nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. He gently touched his son's tiny hand, marveling when the infant's fingers curled reflexively around his own. "Welcome to the family, Samuel Henry," he whispered. Later that morning, once Jessie and the baby had been cleaned up and made comfortable, Mrs. Peterson brought Abigail in to meet her brother. The little girl, now nearly 14 months old, approached the bed cautiously, her eyes wide with curiosity. "Abigail," Jessie said softly, "this is your brother Samuel. Can you say hello?" Abigail studied the bundle in her mother's arms for a long moment before breaking into a wide grin. "Baby," she exclaimed, reaching out to touch his blanket. "That's right, sweetheart," Hank said, lifting her onto the bed so she could see better. "Your baby brother." As he watched Abigail's gentle, curious exploration of the newest member of their family, Hank was struck by how far they had come. From the depths of grief and loneliness to this moment of perfect joy, it seemed almost miraculous. The days that followed were a blur of adjusting to life with a newborn again, but this time with the confidence that came from experience and the support of having a partner to share the responsibilities. Jessie recovered quickly from the birth, though Hank insisted she rest as much as possible while he took over many of the household duties. "You're becoming quite the domestic," Jessie observed with amusement one afternoon as she nursed Samuel while Hank hung laundry on the line, Abigail helping by handing him clothespins. "I'm a man of many talents," Hank replied with a wink. "Rancher, father, laundry expert." "And husband," Jessie added softly. "The very best husband." Hank paused in his task, struck by the love in her voice. "Only because I have the very best wife," he said. As summer turned to fall and fall to winter, the Jacobs family settled into their expanded roles. Samuel grew rapidly, a happy, sturdy baby with his mother's green eyes and his father's determined chin. Abigail became a protective and loving big sister, often reading to him from her picture books and bringing him toys. In the evenings, after the children were asleep, Hank and Jessie would sit together in front of the fire, often in the rocking chair that had become a fixture of their family life. Sometimes they talked about the future, making plans for the ranch and the children. Sometimes they reminisced about the past, sharing stories of Elizabeth and Henry, keeping their memories alive while building new ones together. Do you ever wonder what might have happened if I hadn't come to your door that night? Jessie asked one such evening as they sat wrapped in a quilt, watching the flames dance in the fireplace. I try not to think about it, Hank admitted. The idea of never having found you, never having this life together, it's too painful to consider, Jessie nodded, understanding in her eyes. I believe we were meant to find each other, she said. That somewhere Elizabeth and Henry guided us together, knowing we would heal each other. I'd like to think that's true, Hank said, pulling her closer. That they're at peace knowing we're happy. We are happy, aren't we? Jessie said, more statement than question. Happier than I ever dreamed possible after I lost Elizabeth, Hank confirmed. You gave me back my life, Jessie Jacobs. You and the children, you're everything to me. Jessie turned in his arms, kissing him softly. And you're everything to us, she whispered against his lips. Outside, snow began to fall, covering the Dakota plains in a blanket of white. Inside the Jacobs' home, warmth and love held the winter at bay. Where once a widowed cowboy had held his baby in tears, now a family thrived, built on the foundation of second chances and the courage to love again. As Hank held his wife in his arms, listening to the soft breathing of their children in the next room, he felt a profound sense of gratitude. Life had taken him on an unexpected journey, through the darkest valleys of grief to the brightest peaks of joy. And though the path had been difficult, he wouldn't change a single step that had led him here to this moment, this family, this love that would sustain them through all the seasons to come.